PhD in engineering, if I understood correctly, and modeling since 15 years, now 3 years with MAN. And he will talk a little bit about Power-to-X and how they model Power-to-X with PLEXOS.
Right, thank you. Do you have the... Oh, there it is. It's coming. Thank you. So, welcome also from my side, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about Power-to-X. So, very similar topic, a great presentation that we've just seen. I will touch on some very similar points and maybe adding a bit more here and there, having a somewhat different perspective on this topic. Yeah, so let's go right in here. All right. So our ambition is moving big things to zero at MAN Energy Solutions. And to achieve this goal, we rely on different pillars or different technologies. And I just wanted to give you a little introduction about this. So we're working on heat pumps, for example. These are very huge or large heat pumps for industrial applications, industrial heat, or also for district heating grids. Then the topic of carbon capture, we are building CO2 compressors that are used for the sequestration of carbon dioxide. Then we have the PEM electrolysis. Here we have our daughter company, Quest One, who is building these electrolyzers. And those we use to make larger systems out of that, and also going a bit more, a step further to other renewable fuels, like we just heard, for example, ammonia or methane, or yeah, any kind of fuels really. And then we have the green engines. So we build engines for the propulsion of ships, but also for the power generation. And of course, it is our ambition here to make all these also run on renewable fuels. Some of them, some fuels can already be used today, and there are more to come in the future. And then the last pillar, retrofits. Well, we are a company with a long history, and the products that we build, that usually last quite long, so some decades. So therefore, there is a big customer fleet already existing, and this is, of course, also a big opportunity to reduce emissions. So with that, I would like to start with my talk about Power-to-X. I've divided this into two parts. The first one here, the modeling part, telling you about how I modeled this system, and then in the second part, going a bit more into detail with an example and showing you the simulation results. So what is Power-to-X? We've heard a lot already. Let me quickly, maybe a bit quicker, go through this one here. So we have electricity on the left going in, usually from PV and wind. There can also be some coming from the grid. And then this electricity is used to produce some other product X, so to speak. So this could be, for example, heat. If we have a heat pump system, we would be producing district heat or also industrial heat. It could also be synthetic fuels. So if we had an electrolyzer, we would be producing hydrogen, and then there can be more process steps towards other fuels like ammonia or hydrocarbons, methane, or even longer hydrocarbons. So what all these have in common with regard to PLEXOS is that they can be modeled in a very similar way. And this is what I would like to talk about a bit more in detail. So I see three kind of different ways to model Power-to-X and PLEXOS. The first one is using the electric class, and within the electric class using the Power-to-X class, and that is then producing heat usually. And it's called heat in there, but you can also use it for other things. So it could also be hydrogen, let's say. It doesn't really matter in terms of the modeling itself. The good thing about the electric class is it's easy to use, and you have all the electric capabilities or all the electric class capabilities at hand. So if you would want to go a bit more deeper on the electric side, like modeling also ancillary service, for example, that could easily be done. But on the downside, if you want to go more into details regarding the process itself, so anything that comes maybe beyond turning hydrogen into something else, this is not so easy with the electric class. The second option also has been mentioned already today, the universal class. You could also set up your entire system only using the universal class, which would mean also the electric components would then be set up in there. So let's say you have a PV plant, you would set up a process, PV process, you would set up a facility called maybe PV power plant, and you would produce a commodity which you could then call, for example, electricity. The good thing here is you can model a lot of different processes. So if you want to go very much in detail with that, can be done with the universal class. On the downside, you are now somewhat limited using the electric parts or modeling the electric parts. And then the third option, well, you can do kind of like a combination of the two, which would mean you would use the electric class for the electric components and then the universal class for more like the process-related components. And you could use here the Power-to-X class to kind of connect the two. Yeah, this would give you great potential modeling all the details on both ends, but it can also be a bit tricky if you want to put together the different components, especially if you have a lot of electricity going to different parts of your model. So for my example that I'm going to show you here, I've stick only to the universal class using that one. So the model that we set up, let me guide you through this here. So we've started here actually with a PPA, so fixed PPA, where you just pay per megawatt hour. We've also included the day-ahead market, so you can buy and sell electricity there when you don't have anything available here coming from the renewables. And there's also a battery included. So you can charge, let's say, the battery if you have a lot of renewable power, but also if the market prices are low, if that's beneficial. Then we have here the electrolyzer running from the electricity, producing hydrogen, and most of that hydrogen would then be used directly by, in this case, a methanation reactor. So I'm modeling here a power-to-methane system. The methanation reactor needs CO2 that can be purchased, and then the methane is sold to a market, or you could also set a demand instead that you want to produce over a year. There is also a storage available, the hydrogen storage or compressed hydrogen storage in this case. So I've also added a compressor that's using the hydrogen but also needs here some electricity to run. You could add a lot more details to the system. I've just stick to this. So let's say you could add here some water usage. The electrolyzer, of course, also needs water. You could also add a lot more here on the electric side, like ancillary service markets, for example. Or on the other end, your reactor produces not only methane, but also heat. So you could also model the usage of the heat. So with that, let me come to a bit more detailed example and the simulation results. So I've just explained already the model setup. Now what I've done here is I've run an optimization but for just a certain part of the model, so just for those components that are marked here in red. So if I now maybe start over here with the other components being fixed. So I started with the reactor here. It needs CO2, which can be bought at a fixed price. Also my methane is sold at a fixed price. And I set this reactor to a fixed size. And that size fits to an electrolyzer of 190 megawatts. So this is just for you to get an idea of the size of the system. And this 190 megawatt means if you have an electrolyzer running at this electric power, then it would produce exactly the amount of hydrogen that would be used if you also run your reactor at full load. So the electrolyzer here can of course also be bigger. If it's bigger, then it would mean that most of it would still be used directly by the reactor, but you can also store in your hydrogen storage, and this storage is also optimized in the model. I did not optimize the compressor here, so this is kind of growing with your storage needs. Then on the electric side, we have the PPA, wind and PV. Those are also optimized, and I've chosen here a location in Germany with weather data from 2024 to get the correct output of these two systems. And I've also picked for the day-ahead market prices from Germany from 2024, Germany-Luxembourg from the same year. This is very important. Just to comment here, it's very important to pick the same years here at the same timing, because there's a very strong correlation with the prices, with the electricity prices, depending on the weather, which we've also seen this morning in one of the presentations. So if the sun is shining in Germany, then usually the prices are very low or even negative. So if you do not regard this in your model, then you would get like quite some errors in there. Then there's also the battery that can be used to store. I've set up 4 different scenarios here. The first one, the day ahead only. So here you see we only have the day ahead market. There is no PPA, no battery, also no hydrogen storage. It's not really a realistic case. It's very risky because you're depending a lot on what the day-ahead market prices are like, and if you would like to run your system over many years, this would be very risky, and you also would probably not find any financing for this. But it's a very interesting case just for a benchmark. This is also why I put this on here. Then the second scenario, and there most of the electricity is coming from the PPA, but I also allowed for around 5% of it coming from the day-ahead market. And there's also a hydrogen storage included that can be used to balance the renewables. Then the third scenario, very similar to the second, but here I just added also a battery, so also the battery is being optimized here. And now you have the 2 components, battery and hydrogen storage for balancing of renewables. And then on the very right, the last scenario, this is kind of like an island case. So you do not have any connection to the grid. You cannot buy any electricity, but you also cannot sell any excess electricity to the grid. So everything is coming from the PPA, and there is a hydrogen storage to balance the fluctuations. If we look at the results for these 4 cases, let's start here with the day-ahead only scenario. So here on the graph you see the different sizes of system components that PLEXOS calculated. For the day-ahead only scenario, well, there is no battery, no PV, no wind, no hydrogen storage. So the electrolyzer is just the 190 megawatt that perfectly matches also the reactor. And you see on the right, I've put there the levelized cost of methane, and I set this to 100% as a benchmark. We look at the second scenario here, where we already have most of the electricity coming from the PPA. You see the electrolyzer is a bit larger, 210 megawatts here, so you do produce some additional hydrogen from time to time. And you see also that PV and wind are quite large, even larger than the electrolyzer itself. So you do have a lot of renewable capacity, but of course it's not always running at full power. But there are quite some times where you have excess renewable electricity. And there's also hydrogen storage here, around 350 megawatt hours of storage capacity. So this would give you around 2 hours of operation of the reactor at full load, just so that you get an idea of the size. For the third scenario, here including a battery. So there we see that now that we shift some of the storage away from hydrogen towards the battery, the electrolyzer gets a bit smaller again. So we are here at 200 megawatts. And there's also a shift here from wind towards PV. In my case, the PV PPA is a bit cheaper than the wind, and so this is the reason for that. And then the last scenario, this was the island case where you do not have any grid connection. There you have to build a lot. I mean, Anastasios, he also just told you something similar here. So you have to just build a lot of PV, a lot of wind, and also a lot of hydrogen storage in order to make this capable. And looking at the cost, what you see here on the left is also very similar. So for the island case, you end up with a much higher cost. So it's really not recommended. Then for those two PPA cases here, we are similar in cost and also not really that much more expensive than if you would only rely on the day-ahead market. So what does this tell us? Well, I've put here three main points that it at least was important for me. So it makes sense to really use the market potentials that you have. Now here I have only added the day-ahead market, but if you go for an island system, you usually end up quite expensive, and it's not really necessary. Then the PPAs, these two cases here, well, we are also more expensive than for the just only day-ahead market, but the price increase is not that large, and in return you get a quite big reduction in risk. So you have 95% of your electricity purchases secured, only 5% are left, and for this, safety, only like 2 or 3% higher prices. And then just the third one, just a remark, these are now the results for just one location. So of course, these are very specific for other locations. So if you want to run your own system or look at your own location, then results might be quite different. So with that, just some key takeaways. Well, good component sizing, that's always important. It reduces the risk and also the cost. Then the second one, I think that's probably also clear for many of you who do modeling. It's always good to start with a rough model, maybe a broad model, and see what components you actually need, see where the results are going, and then you can maybe go more into details, also modeling some process steps that you don't really want to model from the very beginning. And then the third one here, I really recommend making use of the markets that you have. This can be the day-ahead markets, but also more markets like ancillary services, or maybe even other markets like selling your heat. This is important for Power-to-X plants because we've heard with the questions before, it's not something that's giving you a cheap fuel. So if you have options for reducing this cost, this will be very beneficial. And sometimes you don't want to do this during the design phase already, but even if you keep this part out, you can still make use of it during operation. So design for something that's like safe and not very risky, and then when you're in operation, you can just make use of things that are there that don't add any risk, but just bring you some additional value. With that, I would like to finish. I'm looking forward to your questions and, of course, also discussions later on during the next days. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Moritz, for the introduction on what you did and how you did the modeling of P2X within PLEXOS. Are there any questions over there?
That's getting really...
Hi, I'm Michael from CIP. 2 questions. I'll start with the first one. On the evaluation of economics, if you can skip to that slide from prior.
Try.
See whether that's possible. I'll pose the question in the meantime. Well,
this one here, you mean?
Yeah, that one. When evaluating the different configurations and the levelized costs, did you use expansion candidates or did you do a post-processing to evaluate the economics of the different configurations and capacity sizes?
Right, so this was like an LT capacity expansion model.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, and then I did, of course, the ST after, or MT and ST afterwards for the dispatch. And these are then the results. Well, these are the LT results, and then this is coming from the ST, the levelized cost.
Okay, thanks. Then a question to the slide you showed with the 3 possible options for modeling the system topology. You said you ended up using the electrical class?
No, The universal
versus,
class
sorry,
is
yeah.
what I used.
Did you
yes, for this
experiment
one.
with the other ones? And what were you? I see the main points are here on the combined electrical and universal. But did you try and model the system all the way through, or and what were? Can you put some more words on your experiences with each?
Right. So for this one here, this is what I actually would recommend if you have maybe, let's say you already have an electric model with different generators and everything, your electric system, and you just want to add one power-to-X plant to it, where you don't really care so much about the power-to-X itself. It's for you maybe just a consumer of electricity, then I would go for this one, because you don't really need all the details on the process side. If you want to model more the details of the process itself, so maybe I go forward here. If you're like, if you want to model the electricity use of the compressor, or maybe you have more things in here, like water is coming from here, or you sell heat even there on the from the reactor. If you do something like this you cannot do in the electric class. So then my recommendation would be to go for the universal class. But as this limits you on the electric side, I mean, this is the best option, but it can become very complex if you set up a model like this. And if you have many users for the electricity, it can also be a bit tricky to get the electricity to all the different users. But if you want to go that way, I mean, with that one you can model more or less everything.
Thanks. And in your case, using the universal class, if I understood you correctly,
yes,
then you did not make use of the native PLEXOS object on Power-to-X for the electrolyzer, I'm presuming.
That's right. Yes, I did not use this one here.
Yeah,
that's right. So it's just every component here is set up in the universal class. So there is like a PV process there with a PV plant, and the PV plant or this process produces electricity, just like the wind. Then there's a market that you can buy and sell electricity to and from. There's a storage component added to this commodity electricity. There's also a commodity hydrogen, and in my case even two, because I have here this normal standard hydrogen, and then the compressed hydrogen is another commodity here. And then the methane itself, or the CO2 as well, yes. So everything is in the universal class.
thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Over here.
Thanks very much. Ali Reza from ESB. I have a quick question for you. I appreciate that you need a kind of storage when your load is not fixed or your load is not following what is produced by the electrolyzer. And I also appreciate that you need the storage here in order to keep the size of your methanation reactor low. Otherwise, it would be really large since it needs to consume whatever is produced in the electrolyzer. But, you know, in terms of CO2, the price of that would be negative, right? Since
usually it's not negative. I know that sounds a bit weird, but if you need to get CO2 from somewhere, you usually have to pay for it.
You need to pay for that. Okay, so you're not cleaning the air, and then you are converting it to methane that is burned somewhere else and is producing CO2. And getting back to the principle of kind of centralized planning, is there any government supporting this idea, like producing methane from renewables?
Well, I would say there are many governments, but of course it all depends then a lot from where's your CO2 coming from, right?
Yeah.
It could be a renewable source. It could also be like taking it from the air via direct air capture, and then you would really have like a green methane. Or it could be a biogenic CO2, it would also be a green methane.
But
it could also come
from, isn't it expensive to have a kind of CO2 capture or carbon capture plants to produce that CO2 and then feed it to a methane reactor to produce methane.
Yes, it is expensive. If you do direct air capture, it's not something cheap. So it's
So-
probably much cheaper if you go like the biogenic way.
Yeah. What's the point? I mean, from moving toward net zero perspective, what's the point of producing methane, which is not clean?
Well, if you take out the CO2 from a biosource or from the air, then it would be a green fuel, right? And
Yeah, but you need to burn the methane somewhere else, and that
because,
produces.
right, when you burn the methane, then the CO2 would go back to the air, so you would have kind of like a closed loop. And the reason why you would want to do that is that compared to hydrogen, let's say, it's easier to transport the methane. There is a lot of infrastructure available. So for example, if you want to run a ship, a big ship going like from the ocean, there are a lot of LNG ships, but there are hardly any hydrogen ships. So if you want to fuel those, it's very unlikely that it will be done using hydrogen. There are other options, maybe ammonia. We just heard about ammonia that at least doesn't contain any carbon. So that also has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's very unlikely that it's going to be pure hydrogen because that would need to be compressed or liquefied, which is also energy intensive, and you still need a big volume for it.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much.
Perfect, thank you. I think there are more questions, but we are running out of time, so I'll encourage everybody that still has some questions, maybe grab more. It's in one of the breaks. Thank you.